Well, I don't know if you're referring to Joe Biden pardoning his son after he said he would not pardon Hunter Biden, or the
No, I actually
commutation
referred
of
to
all
January
the
6th. I'm sorry.
all the sentences that the people that were on death row. I've met with those families.
No,
and all of those sentences were commuted. I'm not going to comment on pardons on either side of the aisle.
So, well, I'm not asking about either side. I'm asking, you're the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You have a responsibility directly, but you sworn oath to the Constitution, not the president. Want to know what your views are. In 2024, the U.S. Capitol Police identified and received nearly 9,500 concerning statements or threats against members. Federal prosecutors have only secured 8 convictions so far, and the heightened threat environment demands an all-hands-on-deck approach. Will you commit to assigning an assistant U.S. attorney or a special assistant U.S. attorney in each of the 94 federal districts to, at least on a part-time basis, investigate and prosecute threats against members of Congress?
So thank you for bringing that up, and I take that very seriously. Not only what happened in Minnesota was horrible. I've spoken to Keith Ellison. I've spoken to Amy Klobuchar about that. It's horrible. We are involved in that. The FBI was involved. Our U.S. attorneys are involved. Many of these are district to district. So the way we're doing that is, I will tell you, my National Security Division is involved in all of those and assisting in those. We meet every single morning and we discuss that. But many of those, Minnesota, will be handled in the state in which it happened. Another one is Governor. I'm sorry if I can keep going. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't mean
Quickly,
to.
though.
I filibuster. Governor Shapiro and what happened in Pennsylvania with Governor Shapiro. I've spoken to Governor Shapiro. We are working hand in hand, our U.S. attorney with the district attorney there, hand in hand, just like in Minnesota. I made sure our U.S. attorney and our district attorneys there were working hand in hand. Political party doesn't matter when something like this happens. And I also want to make sure all members of Congress are safe as well.
Okay, and I would reiterate, Chairman Stile and I think Chairman Stile and I agree that at least a part-time in each of the 94 districts would be appropriate. Let me change topics for just a moment.
I'm really quick on that. Yes, we're doing that through our National Security Division, so I think that's already in the works, and I would be glad to meet with you in a secure facility to talk about that.
Very good, thank you. Continuing, in addition to my role here, the committee that I serve on as an authorizer oversees Capitol security as well as federal elections, so I'm closely following the aftermath of January 6th. Recently, several defendants who received presidential pardons related to that day are now arguing in court that the pardon covers crimes like, for instance, illegal firearm possession discovered in a search of an individual's home in California months after January 6th. What's your position on whether the pardons cover these separate offenses?
The pardon power rests with the president, not the Department of Justice, and some of that is pending litigation, and I cannot discuss pending litigation.
Well, I'm not asking you about who has the right to a pardon. I think as the Department of Justice in February wrote, the pardon is an act of grace which removes the punishment from a crime a person has committed. It further said, in its effect, the granting of a pardon is in no sense the overturning of a judgment of conviction. It is an executive action that mitigates or sets aside punishment. So as the chief law enforcement officer, what's your opinion, not the president's power of whether he can offer a pardon? That's pretty clear in the Constitution. But for crimes committed unrelated to January 6th, would you suggest that the pardons would cover activities or crimes potentially committed outside of that by the same person?
Well, I don't know if you're referring to Joe Biden pardoning his son after he said he would not pardon Hunter Biden, or the commutation of
January 6th. I'm sorry.
all the sentences that the people that were on death row. I've met with those families. All of those sentences were commuted. I'm not going to comment on pardons on either side of the aisle.
So, well, I'm not asking about either side. I'm asking, you're the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You have a responsibility directly, but you sworn oath to the Constitution, not the president. Want to know what your views are on the extent to which pardons cover potential crimes committed by individuals who have been pardoned but unrelated to January 6th.
Do you mean the ones that were done by the auto pen? I'm not going to discuss anything that
Mr.
could
Chairman,
be or not be pending litigation.
Respectfully, Ms. DeLauro accused you of filibustering. I think that's the height of filibustering. This is a serious, serious topic. and for you to suggest that you don't have an opinion or to divert to other things that have nothing to do with January 6 pardons, I think is frankly demeaning to your responsibilities and your job. With that, I'll yield back.
What we just saw in that exchange with Pam Bondi wasn't just a political back and forth. It was a moment that reveals something much bigger about the way power is exercised and how fragile the rule of law can become when it collides with politics. The question Bondi was asked was crystal clear. Do presidential pardons connected to January 6th extend beyond that day to cover other crimes committed later on by the same individuals? In other words, does a pardon erase accountability for future wrongdoing? That's a question at the very heart of how our legal system functions, and it deserved a straightforward answer. But instead, Bondi gave us misdirection. She pivoted to Hunter Biden, she pivoted to death row commutations, she filibustered, she blurred the issue. And in doing so, she revealed something about how she views power, not as a matter of constitutional principle, but as a tool that can be bent depending on whose side you're on. To understand why this matters, you need to know the history. The pardon power, granted by the Constitution, is broad, but it was never intended to be limitless. In fact, as far back as the founding era, pardons were seen as a tool of mercy, meant to correct injustices or offer clemency after punishment had already been handed down. The Supreme Court has reaffirmed over and over that pardons apply to specific crimes already committed. They don't give someone a blank check to break the law going forward. Yet in her testimony, Bondi wouldn't even affirm that most basic truth. That's why this hearing is so significant. Because if the nation's top law enforcement official refuses to recognize limits on pardons, then the message is chilling. Justice can be rewritten at will, depending on political loyalty. Imagine a system where allies of a president commit crimes, knowing they'll never face accountability because they're shielded by sweeping pardons. That's not a democracy governed by the rule of law. That's a system governed by power and favoritism. And this is where the danger really lies. Bondi's refusal to answer directly doesn't just undermine trust in her own credibility, it raises real concerns about how she would run the Department of Justice. The DOJ is supposed to be the institution that protects the law above politics. But what happens when its leader sees the law as flexible, as negotiable, as something to be wielded rather than upheld? That's not just a personnel problem, that's a constitutional crisis waiting to happen. So viewers need to recognize that this isn't about partisan gotchas. It's about whether we can trust the people at the highest levels of government to tell the truth about the boundaries of their power. Bondi didn't just dodge, she tried to confuse the public, to muddy the waters, to make you throw up your hands and think, well, it's all just politics. But it's not. The line between what is constitutional and what is abuse of power is real, and we can't afford to let it blur. This is why hearings like this matter so much. They peel back the curtain. They show us not just what nominees say when they're on camera, but how they think about accountability when pressed under oath. And in Bondi's case, the refusal to give a straight answer tells us more than any campaign speech ever could. So the question for us, the public, is simple. Do we want a Justice Department that stands above politics or one that bends to it? And if the answer is the latter, then democracy itself is in jeopardy. That's why it's so important that we keep paying attention, that we don't let these hearings slip by unnoticed. Because every non-answer, every evasion, every refusal to affirm the most basic principles of law, they're warning signs. And history has shown us that when warning signs are ignored, the damage is much harder to repair. If you believe accountability matters, if you believe the Constitution should come before politics, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, and keep the pressure on those who think they can dodge the truth. Because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And right now, the stakes couldn't be higher.